My name is Maya Whitfield. I'm 32, and for 3 years, I carried around this one image in my head that I couldn't shake. My mother's voice on the phone, calm as anything, telling me she wasn't coming to my wedding because my sister's dog had a vet appointment. I was standing in the back room of the venue in my dress, veil already pinned, when my phone buzzed on the folding chair next to me, 82 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I picked it up already knowing, somehow, that I shouldn't. What she said next is the reason I'm telling you this story at all, and it isn't even close to the worst part. Welcome back to Women Drama Stories. If you're new here, this is the channel for quiet women and the loud truths they finally tell. Hit subscribe before we go on, because you do not want to miss how this one ends. So, for context, before I get into that phone call, I should probably tell you who I am and what my family actually looks like, because none of this makes sense without the years underneath it. I'm a registered nurse. I spent 6 years in the ICU before I moved into a role I genuinely love. I'm a transplant coordinator at a regional medical center outside Sacramento. My job, on a normal day, is to manage the process between patients who need organs and the donors who might be able to give them. I know more about kidney function, antigen matching, and dialysis schedules than almost anyone outside a nephrology department. I'm telling you that now because it matters later. It matters a lot later. I grew up the older of 2 daughters. My sister Brooke is 4 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids, there was a pattern in our house that I didn't have a name for until I was an adult. I was the easy one, and Brooke was the one who needed protecting. I made good grades, played sports, didn't cause trouble, so my parents, Linda and Robert, treated my independence as permission to focus their attention elsewhere. Brooke struggled more, with anxiety, with finishing things, with relationships, and somewhere along the way, Brooke needs us became the family's permanent weather pattern. It rained on her more, so everyone carried her umbrella. I'm not going to sit here and list every example because honestly, if I did, we'd be here for hours. But I'll give you the shorthand. My senior year track regional, the one meet that actually mattered for a scholarship, my parents missed it because Brooke had a meltdown over a boy and needed picking up from a party. My college graduation, they came late and left early because Brooke had food poisoning 40 minutes away and just needed someone there. I used to tell myself it evened out eventually. It never did. I just got better at not counting. By the time I met my husband, David, I'd built a life that didn't depend on my parents noticing me. David's family is warm in a loud, easy way mine never was, and being around them used to make my chest ache a little, in a good way and a sad way at the same time. When David proposed, I said yes in about 4 seconds, and we planned a wedding for the following spring, a small outdoor ceremony at a vineyard about 40 minutes from where my parents live. I sent my parents the date a full year in advance. I asked my mom to help me pick the flowers. I asked my dad to walk me down the aisle. For about 10 months, it felt like maybe this time would be different. Anyway, it wasn't. The week before the wedding, my sister Brooke announced, out of absolutely nowhere, that her boyfriend at the time, a guy she'd been dating for maybe 2 months, was taking her to Cabo, spontaneously. The trip overlapped my wedding weekend exactly, which I didn't think much of at first, because Brooke being impulsive wasn't new information to me. What I didn't know was that Brooke had a 15-year-old terrier named Biscuit, who had a seizure disorder and severe separation anxiety, and that instead of boarding him or hiring a sitter, or, I don't know, not going on the trip the week of her sister's wedding, Brooke asked my parents to stay at her apartment and watch him, and they said yes. Without telling me, I found out the morning of my wedding. I was in the back room of the venue, hair half done, when my mother called. Her voice was so even, so reasonable, that for a second I actually thought she was calling to ask what time to arrive. Instead, she told me that Biscuit had thrown up twice that morning, that the vet said stress could trigger a seizure if he was left alone too long, and that she and my dad had decided it was safer if they stayed at Brooke's through the weekend, just to be sure. She said it the way you'd announce a scheduling conflict. She said, "We feel terrible, sweetheart, but you understand. It's an emergency. I remember standing there with a bobby pin in my hand, and for a few seconds I genuinely couldn't make words come out of my mouth. I asked her if she meant they weren't coming at all. Not the rehearsal dinner, which they'd already missed the night before for traffic, but the actual ceremony. She said, and I'm not exaggerating this, "Your father feels awful, but Biscuit really can't be alone right now." She told me Brooke would call me later to apologize on the dog's behalf, which is a sentence I never thought I'd hear in my entire life. I should mention, my dad never got on the phone. Not once. He let my mother do the talking, the same way he'd let her do the talking my whole life whenever the decision involved choosing between me and my sister. I didn't cry. I want to be really clear about that, because it would be easy for me to tell you I broke down sobbing into my veil, and that's just not what happened. What happened is something colder. I hung up the phone, looked at myself in the mirror, and felt this strange, settling kind of clarity, like a long-running argument inside me had finally just ended, because there was no more evidence left to argue with. My Uncle Walt, my dad's older brother, walked me down the aisle that day. He didn't ask a single question. He just showed up 40 minutes early in a borrowed tie and said, "Tell me where to stand." David's parents hugged me so hard at the reception, I had a faint bruise on my collarbone for 2 days afterward, which honestly felt more appropriate than anything my own parents could have said. My speech that night didn't mention my parents once. People noticed. Nobody asked. For months after, I told myself I was fine. I sent the usual birthday texts. I showed up to the usual holidays, smiled in the usual photos. But something had shifted permanently, the kind of shift you can't undo with an apology, because there was never even an apology to undo. Brooke texted me a week later, a single line. "Sorry about the wedding thing, glad it worked out." With a margarita emoji, like she was commenting on weather. I learned something that year that I still think about. Love without consistency is just convenience wearing a nicer word. Over the next 3 years, the distance between me and my parents didn't look dramatic from the outside. We weren't estranged, not officially. I just quietly stopped expecting anything. I didn't tell them when David and I bought our first house. I didn't tell them about a miscarriage I went through 18 months in, something I told David's mother before I told my own. I went to family things because skipping them felt like more effort than just showing up and saying nothing. My mother would post photos of Brooke's new puppy. She'd gotten a second dog by then, with captions like, "Our baby," and I'd scroll past them on my lunch break and feel almost nothing, which scared me more than feeling something would have. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd made peace with being an afterthought, the kind of peace that's really just exhaustion wearing a calmer face. I had no idea that 3 years later, my phone would ring again, and this time what they needed from me, only I could give them. It was a Tuesday in March when my mother called, sounding like a different person than the one I'd been quietly avoiding for years. Her voice was shaking. She told me my dad had been having fatigue and swelling for months, that he'd finally gone in for blood work, and that his kidneys were failing. Stage 5, end-stage renal disease. He'd already started dialysis, 3 sessions a week, 4 hours each. The nephrologist had told them that without a transplant, his 5-year survival odds dropped fast, and that the deceased donor waitlist in our region was running 3 to 5 years for someone with his blood type. Because of my job, I understood every single word of that sentence in a way most families don't. I knew exactly what those numbers meant. I knew what a body looks like after a year on dialysis versus what it looks like after a successful living donor transplant. I'd coordinated that exact conversation for other families 100 times. I'd just never been on the other side of it. My mother asked if I would consider getting tested to see if I was a match. She said Brooke had already said she couldn't do it. Brooke told them she was trying for a baby with her now husband and didn't want to risk her body going through major surgery right now. Which, for the record, is a medically reasonable thing to say, except that I noticed nobody in my family questioned it for even a second, the same way nobody had ever questioned anything Brooke decided she couldn't handle. I sat with that phone call for a long time after we hung up. I want to be honest with you about what was going through my head. because I think pretending I felt only love and duty would be a lie. Part of me was furious. Part of me thought, you didn't come to my wedding for a dog and now you want my kidney. That thought sat in my chest like a stone for 2 full days. But here's the thing about doing this job for as long as I have. I've sat across from families at the worst moment of their lives more times than I can count, and I've learned that resentment and compassion can occupy the same body at the same time without canceling each other out. My father was dying slowly, in a way that didn't care whether he deserved my forgiveness first. And I decided, somewhere around day 3, that I wasn't going to let 3 years of silence be the reason I didn't even find out if I could help. Not for them, for me. Because I needed to be able to live with whatever I chose, regardless of what they'd earned. But I also decided something else, quietly, just for myself. If I turned out to be a match, I wasn't going to hand over a piece of my body the same way I'd handed over my entire childhood. Silently, automatically, without ever being seen in the process. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen with my eyes open, and with them finally looking back. I went in for the blood work telling myself I could still walk away no matter what the results said. I had no idea that the conversation waiting for me on the other side of that test would change more than just my father's kidney count. The testing process took about 3 weeks. Blood type, antigen typing, cross-match, a full medical workup to make sure my own kidneys could handle losing one. I did it at a different hospital than the one I work at, on purpose, because I didn't want any of my coworkers involved in something this personal. When the transplant nephrologist called me with the results, she told me I was a 6 out of 6 antigen match, which she said, almost laughing, was rarer between siblings than people realize, let alone a near-perfect match like this. She told me it meant lower rejection risk, a better long-term outcome, basically the best possible scenario, short of an identical twin. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for almost 20 minutes after that call. Not crying, just thinking. I called my mother that night and told her the results. I heard her start to cry on the other end of the line, this overwhelmed, relieved kind of crying. And for a second, the old version of me wanted to just say, I'm in, let's schedule it, and let that be that. But I didn't. I told her I needed everyone, her, my dad, even Brooke, in one room before I gave a final answer, because there was something I needed to say first, and I needed it said with everybody listening, not parceled out one phone call at a time the way everything in our family always got handled. She didn't argue. I think she already knew what was coming. We met 2 weeks later in a small consultation room at the transplant center, the same kind of room I sit patients down in for a living, except this time I was the one on the other side of the table. My dad was there, thinner than I remembered, with the faint bruising on his arm from dialysis access. My mother sat beside him. Brooke came too, looking uncomfortable in the way people look when they know a conversation isn't really about them, but suspect it might become about them anyway. The transplant surgeon sat in to go over logistics once we were through talking. I told them I was a strong match and that I was willing to move forward with the donation. I watched my mother's shoulders drop with relief before I even finished the sentence. Then I asked them to wait, because I wasn't done. I told them about that phone call 3 years ago. Not angrily. I want you to picture this delivered calm, almost clinical, the way I talk to families every day at work. I told them I remembered exactly where I was standing, what I was holding, what the room smelled like. I told them I'd never asked for an apology because I didn't think I'd get an honest one. So I just stopped asking for anything at all, from any of them. For 3 years, my mother started crying again. But this time it was different. Not relief, something rawer. She said, "We thought Brooke needed us more. We didn't think you'd even notice if we weren't there." My father, in this thin, tired voice, said he was sorry, that he should have gotten on the phone himself that day instead of letting my mother carry it, that he'd thought about it more times than he ever told anyone. I told them I appreciated hearing that. And then I said the part I'd been rehearsing in my head for 2 weeks. I told them I wasn't donating a kidney to earn an apology, and I wasn't doing it to punish anyone by withholding one either. I was doing it because my father's life mattered, full stop, independent of what any of them owed me. But I also told them I needed them to understand that giving this didn't erase what happened. And it didn't put me back in the role of the daughter who quietly absorbs whatever's left over after Brooke's needs are met. I said it plainly, you can forgive someone and still refuse to be their backup plan. Brooke didn't say much. At one point, she mumbled something about how she would have done it too if her timing had been different. And I just looked at her and said, okay, and let the silence sit there instead of filling it for her, which is something I never used to be able to do. The surgeon moved us into scheduling after that. Surgery was set for 6 weeks out, enough time for my dad's dialysis team to optimize his condition and for the surgical team to do their final pre-op workups on both of us. The surgery itself went the way good transplant surgeries usually go, which is to say, less dramatic than you'd expect from television. I went in first, laparoscopic nephrectomy, about 3 hours. My father went in right after, in the next operating room, and the kidney made the trip between us in under an hour, which is honestly the part of this job that still amazes me even after years of watching it happen. I woke up sore, with 3 small incision sites. And the first thing I asked the recovery nurse was whether my dad's new kidney had started producing urine yet. Because that's the marker that tells you everything's working. It had, almost immediately. The surgeon told me later that's a strong early sign, and with a match as close as ours, they were optimistic about long-term function. My recovery took about 4 weeks before I felt mostly normal again. My father's recovery took longer, but within 2 months his labs were the best they'd looked in over a year. The dialysis chair 3 times a week, 4 hours at a time, gone. Just gone. What changed after that wasn't some instant rewrite of 20 years of family history, and I want to be honest with you about that too, because I don't think that's how real healing works. My parents didn't suddenly become people who showed up for everything. But something did shift. My mother started calling me directly with updates on my dad's checkups instead of routing everything through Brooke first, the way information used to flow in our family. My dad came to my next work anniversary dinner. A small thing. Nothing fancy, but he'd never come to anything like that before. And he sat there the whole time, present in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. I didn't get a grand, cinematic apology tied up with a bow. What I got was smaller and, honestly, more believable. A family that finally had to look directly at the thing they used to look past. Healing someone's body doesn't require you to heal their conscience for them. That part was always going to be on them, and for the first time, they actually picked it up. A few of you watching probably want to know what happened with Brooke, and with the dog that started all of this, so here's where things ended up. Biscuit, the original dog, passed away from old age about 8 months after my dad's surgery. He was 16, which is a long life for a terrier, so it wasn't really a tragedy, just time catching up. Brooke ended up adopting another dog a few months later. A puppy this time, and at a family dinner she half-joked, half-tested the water by asking if I'd ever be willing to dog-sit sometime. For old time's sake? I told her pretty evenly that I'd consider it the same way I'd consider any favor from a friend, meaning, depending on the timing and what else was going on in my life, not as some default assumption that I'd drop everything. She laughed it off like she always does with anything uncomfortable, but I noticed she didn't ask again. Looking back on all of it now, I don't think of myself as someone who got revenge, because nothing about what I did was designed to hurt anyone. I think of myself as someone who finally figured out how to hold 2 true things at once, that I could still show up for my family in the moments that mattered most, and that showing up didn't require me to erase what I'd lived through to get there. I used to think love meant being endlessly available no matter how you were treated. I know now that real love, the kind that lasts, has room in it for boundaries. It has to, or it isn't really love. It's just obligation wearing a softer name. So tell me, was I wrong to set conditions before agreeing to save my own father's life? Or did I earn that conversation after 3 years of being the one who never got chosen? If you've ever had to decide whether someone's emergency deserved more from you than they ever gave you, Drop the word kidney in the comments. I want to hear how you handled it. If this story moved you, stay close because next time it might be your story we're telling. Subscribe to Women Drama Stories so you don't miss it. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, and events are products of imagination, and any resemblance to real people or real situations is purely coincidental.